world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
This episode is brought to you by Dead Man's Wire, the new film from Roquet Entertainment. Dead Man's Wire is the incredible true story of the 1977 kidnapping that turned an aspiring entrepreneur into an outlaw folk hero. Directed by legendary filmmaker Gus Van Sant, Dead Man's Wire stars Bill Skarsgård, Dacre Montgomery, Carrie Elways, and Myha'la, with Coleman Domingo and Al Pacino. Now playing in select theaters everywhere January 16th.
Thanks for listening to No Question About That. You can support this show by visiting patreon.com/NQATpod or in your Apple podcast feed. We do a backer show each week going deep dive into a topic related to United. Or if you don't want to part with your cash, an even better way is to leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And now on with the show. Welcome to United Inc. This is our finance pod with Jamie, also known as Subprime Goals. I'm Ed. How's it going, Jamie?
Yeah, very good. Thanks, Ed. It's been a busy week. It's never quiet in the world of United and sports finance. Lots of stuff for us to dig into this week.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk about Benjamin Sesko. How can United afford this deal? Exactly what criminal acts have we performed in order to do it? A little bit about where Chelsea may come into this and sales. Højlund, fresh links with Milan this week. I think all the reporting is United are looking for a sale. Højlund very specifically said, I want to stay. And then there's Carlos Baleba. It would be an absolutely massive deal because everything that leaves Brighton is an absolutely massive deal. Lots to talk about. It's a bit of football and a lot of money. I guess the question on everyone's mind at the moment, the big one, is, hey, Sir Jim said we were broke and might be going bust 6 months ago, and here we are splurging 200 million on 3 forwards, including a big one with Benjamin Sesko. Exactly how can we afford this?
Yeah, and I've not commented too much on the whole "we were going bust at Christmas" comment in the past. I do think that sometimes people like to view things in a static world, and ultimately things are dynamic, right? Sure. And if you look at the point that I think Jim was making, and at the time he was referring to where we were in 2023, right? Yeah. And if we continue down that path of continuing to spend, et cetera, actually, the club would have run out of money by the end of 2025, given when he did the interview. That's, 18 to 24 months runway, not actually that unusual for a lot of businesses, and not really a, going concern issue, which I know has been highlighted by the press. And then what's he done since then? We know there's been lots of cuts. We know there's been lots of restructuring. That frees up a lot of funds. It also allows you to be a little bit clever about how you might finance a business. So, we've talked a lot about how sales were really important in order to get deals done, and there's not much cash left in the bank. If you actually look at the numbers and how they've structured the deals, you can see that actually they have been pretty clever about how they've structured these 3 deals. We've talked about how the installments, about when transfer fees are actually paid, is really, really important. But if we go into the detail just a little bit, you think about the contracts that were expiring this summer and the fact that Rashford has gone on loan. all in all, United are saving probably somewhere in the region around £35 million. If you look at the reported wages of the players that are coming in, and if you factor in potential bonuses that they'll probably earn on top, which I think a lot of people like to forget, actually, the wages that have been brought in is around about £35 million. Now, that is a lot. You've had 4 players leaving, 3 players come in. So, do the maths. Average wage bill has gone up. But if you think about the structure, the base wages are still all within that kind of probably 125 to 200,000 pound a week mark. So actually, the wages that are being added is all being fully funded. So then we're thinking about the transfer costs. So again, if you factor in things like transfer levies and the installments, actually from the £200 million plus that is being spent this summer, actually only about 105 million is going out the door this season. Right? So we know that there is probably going to be a little bit of a cash deficit, or at the very least, cash flow neutral for 25-26. So that 105 million pounds needs to be funded in some way. We know that there's been a lot of sell-on clauses, and things like Scott McTominay winning the league with Napoli has triggered some of the add-ons from that deal. All in all, that's probably just above 20 million pounds. So you've got 85 million pounds to go. Garnacho sale. There's going to be a lot of negotiations on that, but hopefully there'll be a big chunk coming from that. And so that still probably leaves a bit of a shortfall in terms of a funding gap. So, there was a report by The Athletic, a really good report talking about an additional charge that's been put on the company by Bank of America. I do think it's likely that facility has been in some way expanded and is probably being used as a buffer. Right? And I think the important thing to note here is, obviously, there's a lot of dopamine there's gone into the system, I think, from these deals. There is clearly a bit of a bet that's being made here. I think it's a calculated one, right? It's at some point this window, the bomb squad is going to go and probably cover that funding gap for the 3 strikers.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things that with the Bank of America credit line, there's no desperation to do this right now, not running out of cash right now. I mean, if that was the case, probably, Sir Jim would be riding to the rescue with some additional floated cash, a loan of some kind or something like that. He'd clearly prefer not to do that because it would improve his counterparty's negotiating position. But that seems right? There's that tranche of cash is floating us in the short term, and they're making the bet that they can make sales to even things up and live within our means, as Omar Barada said. It is interesting that we have to think about deals. I'm kind of matured in our thinking, haven't we? Once upon a time, it was just the top line number. Then there was, don't talk about spend, talk about net spend, Arsenal Fan TV and all of that. And now we have to think about it in PSR terms, and now we have to think about it in cash terms, right? So which every business does anyway, right? This is not new. It's just the way we as fans think about how you think about deals. So it's not just a top line fee, it's top line fee plus add-ons. How does that calculate into your PSR position? What are the negotiating tactics between the parties, and how is that being paid? A thing that never used to be announced at all, and United have moved on from paying Harry Maguire's fee all in one lump sum up front. I don't think they'll ever do that again. And I think I'm right in saying that the Brian Mbeumo structure hasn't been reported yet, or at least, I don't know whether you see the details on that one.
No,
we did.
I think Mbeumo has been reported as 4 installments.
4 installments.
We don't know the mix in terms of whether it's whether it's a big chunk up front or not. I assume that it's evenly weighted. We don't know anything about the Benjamin Sesko. I've scrawled the internet, but if people have any ideas, put a comment down below on the YouTube channel. But I've not seen anything on that structure. there was talk about, Leipzig wanting a lot of the cash up front. They've missed out on a lot of their sporting targets. And I think, that has accelerated the need for them to sell players like a Sesko or a Xavi Simons. And so, I might be wrong on that front. And that therefore may be another reason why the credit facility looks to have changed. Still a bet being made.
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are probably the dynamics that are at play.
Yeah. And also we don't know yet the structure of any deals incoming. How much will United seek to get 50% up front? Brighton typically have done, right? I think that's been reported before. They wanted a high chunk up front. It's their operating model. I mean, flipping a £26 million player to 100 million in a year, that's pretty good business. That's pretty good business if you're Brighton. Well, we'll see if United actually do that.
Yeah.
If you were putting percentages on it, you'd probably still have that as a low weighting. Not just that United couldn't afford it, because there are routes to that money, right? So as you just, there's quite a lot of headroom on their credit facility. And we expect a couple of big sales now. Garnacho, Højlund, probably. Just that it may not be seen as the right time for Brighton. They don't actually need to sell.
Yeah, and if you look at the detailed reports, that's the message that is out there. Look, that could just be negotiating from Brighton. Look, I'm sure if someone was willing and able to put 100 million on the table, it would make them think, right? You know, Paul Barber may have a new best customer that's not Chelsea.
Yeah.
But, look, it was surprising to see that. Now, I think if you look at the overall market perspective, the market for Baleba this summer is probably in United's favour.
Yeah.
If you look at other clubs, there's not many that really need a six. They've already kind of, used up their powder to purchase the players that they want. There's probably Liverpool might be in the market. City may be in the market with Rodri, but, maybe not because it's only till September. So, in terms of, other suitors, United would have a clear run at it this summer.
Yeah.
But as you say, I think the deal structure is not going to be advantageous for United to get it done. And, given what we've just talked about, the finances, there would need to be something else that comes into the mix, whether it is equity, whether it is a big sponsorship deal. We didn't get any announcement yesterday upon Nick Carrington, which I know a few people were expecting. Like, Baleba is effectively a bet on the Champions League, right?
Yeah.
And the thing that gives me caution there is you've heard Omar Barada, you've heard Jim Ratcliffe openly say that, previous management have bet the house on getting, buying players to get the Champions League, and it didn't work. It would be an almighty bet.
I think you're right. Look, two things. One, on the market, less competition this summer. Chelsea don't need a six. Liverpool, I mean, it makes sense. They may be choosing between Adam Wharton and Baleba next summer, right? That would make sense for them. City, until they decide Rodri goes, there's no opportunity. Why spend 100 million on a player if you're not going to play him, basically? Rodri's in the team if he's fit. But look at it from Brighton's point of view, they're not going to get it on auction that way if there's only one bidder. United have basically done that all summer, right? It's sound strategy, right? They've got to the point where there's effectively one bidder and managed to underbid Newcastle on Sesko, both on wages and fee as a result. Much smarter than we've been before. They'd like to do this with Baleba as well. I think it would seem that the player from the reporting is very keen, had his head turned. Again, some nefarious tactics there, perhaps. Good on United, well done, and all of that. So, Brighton would prefer not to sell this summer, I imagine. If that is the case, can they do it? How much does the player want to push? And so on, and so on, and so on. And then let's talk about exits a little bit, because it's both cash position and squad management, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kraft Mac and Cheese is better than 90s hip-hop. We'll remind you of your childhood without making you feel incredibly old. Kraft Mac and Cheese. Best thing ever.
I wonder in an ideal world if United didn't need to sort the finances out, whether they might keep Højlund. I mean, I'd heard from people that they were trying to market him around Europe from last autumn, right? So they just needed him because there weren't any other strikers like number 9s of that profile in the squad.
Yeah.
Would appear that, reporting on Milan today, United looking for a cash deal, Milan looking for an option. And we've been burned on options.
Yeah.
Like, if they're not really an option, what is it?
Yeah, I like the option thing is interesting, right? Like there is a clear reason to do an option from the selling club's perspective, right? Like you're giving away some upside and helping to get a deal through.
Yeah.
And in United's situation, you can completely understand why that's the case. But there is an element of how much you just kicking the can down the road, right? If so far the outgoing players are Rashford and Højlund and both on loan with options to buy, think about the risk profile, think about what they've said, it doesn't feel in keeping with it. You're then in a situation increasingly where if you don't get Champions League next season, you've got to try the same trick again in order to just shift wages off the books.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look, can United afford to take a bit of a PSR hit in order to get a deal through the line and take some cash up front? Like, yes, is the simple answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, team does reasonably well, like it means next summer is a whole lot easier.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure they'll be weighing up the risks or potential advantages on Rashford's option. Will Barcelona take it up? They are obviously always managing their finances. Very, very difficult for them. And that might be less about performance because the option is really very, very cheap on a player of his quality, and more about Barcelona's ability to actually register players that they purchase. Rashford's alone, much easier to do it. I think that's been well reported. They don't have problems there. They also need to replace Lewandowski probably next summer. Who's that going to be? A club of Barcelona's stature has to have a real number 9 up there, I imagine. So United will be going, okay, will that actually happen? They would not want too many of these where the can is just kicked down the road and they have to do it again. We've got Anthony as well in a difficult position here. Betis pushing for another loan. Doesn't really serve United's needs very much there. And then Højlund, if that's the same, I'm sure they would want something more concrete. And he has value, Højlund, right? He's done well in Italy in the past, well-ish. And he's still young. There's a lot of upside profile. He's a profile of player that a lot of clubs would want at a reasonable fee if you look at his book value. I mean, it's not great. It's not 20 million. It would have to be north of 30 to meet his book value, wouldn't it? And yeah, depending on how those add-ons are calculated. I think one of them was Champions League qualification, so we don't need to add that add-on into our PSR calculation, sadly. Garnacho, let's talk about him a little bit because Chelsea seem to be playing a fairly canny game here as well. Looks like they'd like to do the deal for him and Xavi Simons. I don't know how they fit all these players into a team, but that's another question. We've got 19 attackers at the moment.
Yeah, we thought we were ambitious buying three new forwards.
I know. I mean, they're definitely getting rid of Nicholas Jackson by the looks of it. Their leaked prices are obviously ridiculous. So we could laugh at that. What would be the number that United would really be looking to? Obviously, it's the biggest one possible. But what helps our cash position or finances the most?
I mean, look, given the prices that are and the benchmarks that are already out there for this summer, you would hope that they could get 60 million plus. I think the reality is it's going to be 50 million plus add-ons at best. Now, look, we can have the age-old argument, United aren't great sellers, etc., etc. I think there is a pragmatism to the environment that we're in. 50 million, as we talked about, that kind of 85 million funding gap would be a big step on the way to getting there. Can Chelsea do that? I mean, yes, they spend a lot of money. And also, by the way, when you think about the UEFA sanction that's been put on them and the restrictions from List A, there's been clearly some briefings out there in terms of the players that are going to leave and the headroom that's going to create for new signings. So that won't really be a stumbling block. If you think about Leipzig, and we talked about their position that they're in, by us doing Sesko before they've sold Simmons, one could postulate that Leipzig don't need as much for Simmons now, which means Chelsea could have more in their pot to pay for Garnacho. So I imagine those may be some of the kind of dynamics at play that United are using to just try and extract maximum value. And I think, look, Garnacho does clearly seem to be the one that is closest to be getting done or be able to get done. And given the funding requirement, they need as much as possible, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is an interesting one, both from a Chelsea strategic point of view. What exactly are they doing here? They look like a human trafficking organization, like moving players in and out all of the time. They're obviously expanding their multi-club or looking to expand their multi-club footprint. They're increasingly using Strasbourg as well, as a few Chelsea players have been there. They have a good relationship, as we talked about before, with the Saudi Pro League. So if they need to offload any players for exaggerated amounts of money, they seem to be able to do that. It's amazing what a good relationship does for you there. Absolutely no conspiracy theories at all. Honest gov. And all of that. So yes, I mean, and Chelsea, again, Athletic dug into exactly how much PSR headroom they've got. They've got loads because they sold the hotel 2 and a bit years ago now, and the women's team last year they were able to get an outside investor to sort of benchmark that. So it gives them some strong arguments that was a market value sale. It's not. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It was. I don't know, 15 times revenue, something like that. Yeah. Try pitching that on Dragon's Den or even to a VC. Like, yeah, that would be good. So, yeah, I mean, can Chelsea do this deal? Yes. Do they want to? I mean, they probably have 5, 6, 7 targets for each position, right? That's just how they seem to work. Garnacho appears to be the one that's really desperate. He wants to stay in the Premier League for some reason. And Chelsea appears to be his preferred option. I'm not sure this is great for him from a career development point of view, but I don't know. I think we get the impression he's perhaps not got the greatest advisors around him. Family don't do it. Bad,
Yeah.
But yes, United will be looking for the biggest fee possible because it helps the PSR position and also just helps from the P&L position as well.
Yeah, and look, let's continue to be optimistic a little bit, right? Like if you get a sale of Garnacho at 50, break even on Anthony, Sancho, that's another probably close to 50. If you do then offload Højlund, I mean, we're talking, this is dream scenario, but if you then got rid of Højlund again for break even or even 30 million, all of a sudden, you've then got some funds and the bet you're making is very, very different. On Belabor, right? Like, I'd say it's a controlled bet. It's probably not that controlled, but it's like this is one signing that is pushing the boat out a little bit, dipping into the reserves in order to try and get Champions League football. And if we're not there this season and say we get Europa League, we could probably still do something the following year.
Yeah, absolutely. And the competition for that final Champions League spot looks open, right? So Liverpool, Arsenal, City, you would say a definite bet. Chelsea, maybe, with all the deal making they've done. They're obviously a team that's progressing. Newcastle in the difficult position, right? And Tottenham, no guarantee that they rise up the table. Done a couple of good deals, but also lost their captain, new manager, all of that kind of stuff. So I'd say 5th place is definitely open. It's fine for United fans or anyone else to say, hey, that looks ambitious, given that United finished 15th last season. But the quality of the squad they've got, they've just added 60 goals Yeah. I know it doesn't. I know teams don't work like that, but they've done something approaching that, and like it's fair enough. It would be an ambitious bet, of course, and like Sir Jim doesn't appear to be the kind of person that makes wild bets. That's not been his finance background, and not necessarily his business background either, where he's actually taking a toxic asset and combining them together to make something better than the sum of the parts. And seemed like he was very cautious, but clearly the United as a club are being more aggressive than we imagined they would be.
Yeah, I think it's like, look, we've talked through the numbers. Like, actually, when you break it down, it feels like it's control, like it's calculated gambles. It doesn't feel like the Antony and Casemiro window where it was, right, okay, this is just, full throttle. We have to go for this because this is the only option that we've got. Like, they're boxing smart, but it is still a bet.
Yeah, and it's balanced in terms of squad construction as well as the money, right? So 2 experienced Premier League players in Cunha and Bumo on reasonable wages, reported at 150-ish. Champions League, that will increase, obviously. And Sesko as well, actually. I think one of the German reporters was saying 160 for Sesko. Bonuses up to 200 if United make the Champions League, which is like much less than was being reported earlier in the window when Arsenal were chasing him. So it is interesting what happened there. He's obviously just a boyhood United fan and taking a haircut on the finances as a result. But all of this just seems very, very sensible. Of course, if United could sell or even give away Casemiro, I mean, there is a book value there. He's got another 15 million on his book value or something like that, which is mad. I'm sure they'd love to do that because they are obviously very aggressively restructuring the wage budget, which should come in at under 200 million this year by the looks of it, and which everyone will have to recalculate their thinking, I think, a little bit. Yeah, I don't know whether you saw Kieran Maguire's new website, where he's doing all the football finances. Yeah, he still has the old number up there at 360 something for United's wage budget. It won't be anywhere near that.
Yeah,
obviously it's a lagging indicator because it's last year's finances, and United have been very aggressive in restructuring. But Casemiro, they'd love to move on. Belieber on a low wage at Brighton, if he is the eventual replacement, effectively, he will not be earning 350,000 a week at all. He'll get a nice bump. He'll do very well. But so United will, end up, once Rashford is gone, then there's a question mark over Bruno next summer. He'll be the biggest earner when Casemiro leaves, whether it's this summer or probably next. What happens then? And that is always the kind of nuclear button that United can press next summer if there is a real problem, right? If United miss out on Champions League football, that's the one. He didn't want to go. United didn't want to sell him. But it's an option, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And the overall wage bill of the business is going to be probably about 310 million this year. Player wages, I imagine somewhere between 220, 250, which would be, it's about 80% of the total. As you say, Casemiro, Bruno, Mount are the three
big ones.
The 3 biggies. Casemiro, the problem goes away financially the end of next season. Bruno, nuclear bottom, but then there is also Mount as well, right? There is cover now in his positions. If he continues to get injured, his book value will be still pretty low. Could you find a buyer at him? Maybe not at his wages, but a deal feels more doable there. I mean, obviously there was never going to be a deal this summer, but actually if he has a half decent season, there's still a few levers to pull to be able to move things around.
Yeah, no, I think that is all fair. Well, I mean, it'd be interesting how this next, we got 3 weeks of the transfer window shakes out. You might have to do a lot of deals, mostly on the exit. Maybe there's a big one on the incoming. We'll see. I was going to say coin flip, but it's not coin flip. I think it's it's well under 50% chance of that happening. And that's mostly because of the strategic reasons for Brighton selling are not really there right now. They don't have to. It'd have to be the player really pushing hard for it. But on the exits, Højlund, Garnacho, Anthony, Sancho, Tyrell Malacia, we're not talking about, it doesn't matter. Like, it's, a couple of million on the book value there. So they will loan him out somewhere so he can get some football, I imagine, especially with Diego Leon doing all right in pre-season. Rapid run through the finances there.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously the 18-month expiry coming up with the transaction, the Sir Jim's original investment.
Yeah.
And whether there would be anything potentially imminent or coming. We've discussed this in the past. It feels difficult to see a scenario where anything dramatically changes. And I think the most likely agitator for change would be, Ineos Sir Jim Ratcliffe.
Mm.
The big question there, which I don't think anyone has the answer to, apart from maybe his wealth advisor, is does he have the funds to enact any sort of change in ownership and therefore kind of like further equity? For a reminder of those people who kind of aren't aware of some of the key deal stipulations, there are certain clauses in there which mean that after a certain period of time, the Glazers, if they want to, can find a buyer for the shares. There are certain conditions where Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos have a right of first offer. So if an offer comes in, they can match it, execute a deal that way, or the Glazers have an option to something called drag and tag rights. So the Glazers could force Sir Jim into selling his shares in a full sale. Look, possibility, but given the valuations that are out there, given the work that has been done by this leadership team so far, to me, you'll think like it's a really small market in terms of the potential buyers at this point, which kind of leads me to believe it's pretty low.
Yeah. I think it seems to me to be very unlikely. Well, the full sale, Glazers pushing a full sale to a third party and forcing Sir Jim to sell his shares at whatever the number is, bigger than $33 a share, which is the floor effectively for a full sale, feels incredibly unlikely. And given the Glazers basically seem very reluctant to sell the full club anyway, right? There's two reasons why that's very unlikely. Would Sir Jim like to buy more equity? I imagine so. That's the way he's built all his businesses. I'm sure if he could do that, even if it was staggered, can he afford it? Yeah. I mean, in terms of his wealth, but a lot of his wealth is locked up in Ineos. I didn't actually look this up. How much did he take as a dividend?
I have in the past.
He took a 500 million pounds dividend at one point, which was very, very nice if you can do that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether he did quite the same this year. Ineos in a more difficult position given the markets they're in. They blamed European markets, so decarbonisation effectively.
Yeah.
On their difficult financial position. Who knows? Yeah.
Yeah. And look, clearly there are moves going on in his portfolio, i.e., looking to sell Nice. I think they've got a new chemicals plant in Holland, maybe, that's coming online, which is the talk is that is potentially going to be very, very cash generative, and so very helpful for Ineos and therefore Sir Jim. It was clear that he did want a full buyout when he initially put his bid in. There was the put and call option staggered over 3 years.
It was the structure rather than the North Star that was under debate there, right? It's funny, I keep having this, people keep having to go at me on Twitter about this. A few of the, let's say that the 58 acolytes don't really like it when I question their motives. But I think, the readout of the sales document gave us a very clear picture of what the negotiations looked like. So Jim wanted to buy the whole club, but not in one go. basically, the Glazers, I think, basically just didn't want to lose control at that point. I think that's the most important thing. And that they are still the most important players here, even if they are completely absent from the Carrington unveiling, the announcement around the new stadium. I think a couple of them did come to the Europa League final. I don't think I've seen them at any of the pre-season games. They seem to have disappeared into the shadows a little bit. Let Sir Jim take all the flack or glory from what's happening at the moment. But are they keen on selling or not? Right. And that is the most important thing, right? At some point, given that also from the sales document, they know that they have a collective legal agreement between them, right? They will act as one. Even if we believe four of the six would like to sell. At least that's been the smoke signals. They have agreed, and that's probably Joel and Avram pushing for that they will act as one always, right? So until they all agree together, nothing changes.
Very true. So we shall see. We shall see if there is anything coming, and I'm sure we'll find out. There'll be no hesitation to tell everyone. But at the moment, we kind of have to act as though, things could continue to be the same. And look, I think even in the scenario where, there is a full takeover, I do hope that the club, like the whole living within their means, really did speak to me. It's one of the nice things about supporting the club that we do. Unless things are really, really bad, they should not have to go to nefarious means to be able to compete.
Yeah. And once this, let's call it a 3-year period of Ineos turning around the squad and turning around the finances of the company as a whole and reconstructing the wage budget, I think we'll get back to what we were used to, right? Which is United as a cash generating machine that through both broadcasting and sponsorship and commercial and match day can compete with the top clubs in Europe on a financial basis. And we'll get back to that, right? And it's 10 years of mismanagement does take a little while to unwind, right? At least 10 years. But we're on that process. And this is why United can be fairly aggressive in the transfer market. We'll come back with an emergency one of these. I think if we do drop 100 million on Carlos Baleba, I mean, there are sporting reasons to be very excited about that. Exactly the kind of profile of player the United really do need. Is it a kind of financial gamble that we need to take? All right, Jamie, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Good stuff, Ed.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find us on all the podcast apps. You can support us at patreon.com/NQATpod or in your Apple podcast feed. We do appreciate it, and we'll catch you all again soon.